joining us this afternoon. My name is Jen Van Corey, Student Life Coordinator at the College of Southern Maryland. On behalf of Student Life and Athletics, welcome to Informed, Engaged, Empowered equals Ready, Set, Vote. This community-focused virtual series promotes voter education, civic engagement, and personal empowerment, and to prepare students and the Southern Maryland community for the upcoming elections. It is brought to you in partnership with the College of Southern Maryland's Thomas Mike Miller Jr. Center for Leadership, Equity and Inclusive Diversity Office, and Student Life Department, with contributions from St. Mary's College of Maryland's Center for the Study of Democracy and Student Activities Department. In celebration of National Voter Registration Day, we are excited about bringing you today's session, Your Vote, Your Choice, Your Future, with Janet Bellizzi and Gladys White from the League of Women Voters of Calvert County. Ms. Bellizzi and Gladys White will discuss the voting process, our voting options due to COVID-19, and resources and strategies for helping others to vote. This session also includes an open discussion and a question and answer component. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Please submit your questions or comments through the chat function. Melissa Chambers, Student Life Coordinator, will be monitoring the chat and will share your questions. Finally, please remember to be courteous and respectful to our presenters and your fellow students and attendees. Okay, without further ado, please welcome Janet Bellizzi and Gladys White.
Hi, everybody. As you heard, I'm Janet Bellizzi. Ms. White and I are very excited to be here today. The forum, as Jennifer had just said, is about your vote, your choice, your future. So when we talk about your vote, we often hear from people that they don't think their voice counts. And we hear that particularly from young people, college students, high school students, and other millennials. We're here today to tell you that that is simply not true. Your voice, your vote is your voice. Next slide, please. If you are registered to vote, we would ask that you confirm that your registration information is correct by going online and checking it. There are numerous reasons why it wouldn't be up to date. Maybe you've moved since you registered to vote, or maybe your marital status has changed, or maybe you simply want to change your party affiliation. In a general election, it does not matter what party you're affiliated with, you can vote regardless. That only pertains to the primaries. But it is really important to check your voter registration information online and make sure that it is current. Next slide, please. If you are not registered to vote, there are many sites online where you can register electronically. The deadline is Tuesday, October 13th. So there are multiple sites. There's the Maryland Board of Elections, which is the first site, and then there's vote.org, which is another site that you can use. Vote.org is just very simple to remember, and it literally takes about 2 to 3 minutes to do it. So if you're thinking about voting or even thinking you're not going to vote, if you're 18 years of age for this election, maybe you should just register anyway, just in case you change your mind the last minute. But although we don't think you should wait until the last minute, sometimes life happens when you're making other plans. So please know that you can still register to vote during early voting and on election day with certain identification. And that list of identification is in a document that we created called the Maryland Voter Bill of Rights. That's available on our website. Next slide, please. So why is it important to vote? Your vote is your voice. Use it. You deserve to be heard. As the late, great John Lewis said in 2017, the vote is precious. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool that we have in a democratic society, and we must use it. A lot more is at stake than who becomes president. electing local, state, and federal officials who will determine your future is entirely in your hands. Local elections are particularly important because they probably impact your everyday life more than state and federal elections. Who runs your county? Who runs your local board of education? Those are all really important things to your everyday life. So when you vote, voting locally is just as important as who will be the president of the United States or who will represent you at a state or at a federal level. Nationally, in 2016, a very disappointing 60% of voting age citizens actually went to the polls and voted or submitted mail-in ballots. That means that 4 out of 10 people did not vote. Now, that could be because they chose not to, or they didn't register, which is absolutely no longer a reason. They felt intimidated, or voter suppression took over and they really weren't able to cast a ballot. Sometimes it's fear, or somebody asking for ID and not necessarily having it on you when you arrive at the polling place. There's also a lot of problems related to purging of voter rolls and incarceration. But Maryland is a state that makes it very easy to vote. In 2018, there was an act passed called the Secure and Accessible Registration Act, as well as a second piece of legislation called the Same-Day Voter Registration. And what those bills did was the Secure and Accessible Registration Act, which was also called SARA, enabled government agencies with which people act with all the time, like social services or your healthcare agency or vote or your Maryland vehicle, those kinds of places. They are all opt-in type of voting registration. So when you show up at motor vehicles and you register for a license or you're registering your car, they're automatically going to gather all that information, and then they're going to say, we're going to now register you to vote unless you don't want us to. So that makes being registered to vote much, much easier than it used to be. And then the Same-Day Registration Act was a referendum on the ballot where the people passed in 2018, once it became passed in the Maryland General Assembly, the people voted it into law as a constitutional amendment that people can now register to vote on election day, not just during early voting. So you can show up at a vote center on election day this year for the first time, and with the proper identification, you can register to vote and you can vote. So this is a great step towards making sure that everyone's vote counts. Convicted felons can vote also after serving their sentences. All they have to do is re-register. So that's a law, and you may have heard about it, that was passed in Florida in 2018. Unfortunately, an appeals court just ruled that former convicted felons in Florida have to pay all outstanding fees before they can register to vote. This is another form of voter suppression. You have to call it what it is. And now I'll turn it over to Ms. White.
Next slide, please. For every young voter between 18 and 29, 2 voters over the age of 65 voted. For every voter between 18 and 29, 6 voters over the age of 30 voted. The US population of people aged 23 to 38, the millennials, is now slightly higher than the population aged 55 to 73, the baby boomers. And yet voters in the 50 plus age group vote at twice the rate. Do you want the people who are your parents, grandparents, or even great-grandparents' ages making decisions as to decision as to what your future will look like. Next slide, please. For every minority voter, there are 3 white voters. It may be true that from a population perspective, there are more whites than minorities. Remember that more whites votes than minorities, but still vote. Changes are happening. Ask yourself, what can we do to increase voter participation? Talk to your family and friends about how not voting allows others to pick your leaders and make decisions about your life. If you want change, you have to be part of the solution. Next slide, please. Janet?
Numerous elections over the past 3 years have been decided by only a few votes, which is why we tell you your vote really does matter. In 2017, the Virginia House of Delegates had a lead cut to 10 votes. And then a recount resulted in a Democratic rival ahead by only 1 vote. Then a three-judge panel appointed by the Virginia Supreme Court, there was a disputed ballot that had been excluded, was instead awarded to a Republican, and then that ended in a tie. The election was finally determined by drawing lots. Each name was put in a film canister, and 1 canister was drawn by the State Board of Elections chairwoman. The Republican won the draw, and the seat. Not only did the Republican win the seat, but the win resulted in Republican control of the House, 51-49. But it just shows you that 1 vote can make a huge difference in the results of an election. In 2018, in the Kentucky House of Representatives, the initial count, the Democrat defeated the incumbent Republican by only 1 vote. And then a recanvass confirmed the vote. The Republican called for a recount, which with 1 vote, of course you would do that as a candidate. And then the Democrat ended up being seated in the House in January of 2019. The House later ordered another recount, and the Democrat emerged as a winner by 3 votes. Then the County Board of Electors voted to reinstate 1 of the votes taken from the Republican, and also counted 5 of 17 rejected absentee ballots. And that ended up in a tie. Finally, at the end of the day, when the Democrat threatened to sue if a coin toss was held, the Republican withdrew his challenge and it settled the election. And then finally, in 2018, the Alaska House of Representatives, there was also a similar situation where it ended up being a tie. And then after weeks of deadlock, a representative who finally won his seat with a coin toss, he switched his party affiliation from Democrat to Independent and was elected Speaker. So as we've said, 1 vote can make a huge difference. Next slide, please. Ms. White?
Only the presidential elections is governed by the Electoral College. All other elections are won by popular vote. A lot of people don't know how the Electoral College actually works. So here is some information you need to know. The total number of electors is 538, which is the total of the number of senators, 100, plus the number of representatives, 435, plus 3 for Washington, D.C. Each state has a number equal to the number of senators it has, 2, plus the number of representatives it has. A candidate needs 270 votes to win the presidency. The 2020 U.S. Census will determine representation in Congress for the next decade. If you have not completed your census form, you still have time. It ends at the end of the month, September the 30th. If people don't participate, we lose representatives and electoral college votes. Choose each state elector is a two-part process. First, the political parties in each state chooses slate of political electors sometime before the general election. The political party wants to ensure that the electors will actually cast their vote for the candidate and not someone else, which can happen. In 2016, 7 electors defected and cast their votes for people who were not running for president. On election day, the voters in each state select their state electors by casting their ballot for president. Only Maine and Nebraska don't use the winner-take-all approach to awarding all electoral votes to the candidates which has the most votes. Next slide. To learn more about the Electoral College, please go to YouTube or Google the topic. We are not going to talk about the primary election today because they're over, and the general election is what is really important right now. If you choose to vote or not to vote in the 2020 primary, you still need to vote in the general election this year. Why vote in the general election? Countless Americans have made the ultimate sacrifice to secure your right to vote, and you owe it to American heroes to vote in every election and to yourself. You probably don't have a good reason not to vote. There are mail-in ballots available and early voting if you are not able to vote on election day. It does not matter which party you are registered with for the general election. You can be an independent and vote Republican or Democrat or any combination. You are free to vote for the candidate of your choice. The 2020 election day is Tuesday, November the 3rd from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Janet?
The general election process this year is really different than it has been in the past, and definitely different from the way the primaries were run this year. So back in the primaries, when we were originally supposed to have them in April, but they were postponed because of the COVID-19 pandemic, Governor Hogan decided that we would have a mail-in ballot vote only, with only one polling place available in Calvert County and other counties. What happened was the Board of Elections in each of the counties mailed the ballots directly to all active eligible voters at that time. So there was no need to submit an application. You simply got your ballot in the mail. The general election this year is different. Governor Hogan had mandated a traditional in-person format supplemented by mail-in ballots because of the pandemic. What happens for the general election is that a mail-in ballot application was mailed to each active eligible voter the last week of August. If you have not received your application so far, you need to call your local county board of elections, tell them you did not receive an application, and find out why. It could be because your voter registration is not up to date. You moved, or you changed your marital status, and when they mailed it, it didn't get to you. So it is super important to check that and to call the Board of Elections if you did not receive one. If you received an envelope in the mail from the Board of Elections and you think it's your ballot, it's not. It is the application which must be filled in order for you to get your ballot in the mail. The deadline to submit a ballot application is October 20th. It must be received by your local Board of Election by October 20th. Otherwise, you will not be able to vote by mail. When you request your absentee ballot, like I did, I requested it online. I submitted it and I asked for my ballot to be delivered electronically. So I'm going to actually get my ballot in my email from absentee.state-board-of-elections, SBE, at marylandelections.us. And when I look for that email, then I'll have my ballot. It's a good idea to add that to your contacts so you don't miss it in case you did elect to have electronic delivery of your ballot. Once you receive your ballot, which will start to be mailed out around the end of this week, please immediately fill it out. Be careful to choose the right number of candidates for each race. It says exactly how many candidates you're allowed to vote for. It'll say vote for up to 2 or vote for 1, and that's what you need to choose. Otherwise, there's a possibility if you overvote, your ballot will not count. Be sure to sign the oath or your vote won't count. If it's being sent in the mail, your oath will be on the envelope. If you're voting, if you get your ballot electronically, it'll be a separate piece of paper. But if that is not signed, it will not count. You can return it via the post office. You can drop your ballot off at a drop box or at a vote center. You have lots of options. So if you're not comfortable after hearing all of this news about how the post office is not going to deliver on time, you still have options that are very safe and secure. You can also track your ballot online so that you know it's been delivered and you know it has been counted. Be careful not to confuse the mailing you've received for your mail-in ballot. I can't stress that enough. Okay, the other option is in-person voting. Early voting this year is from October 26th, which is a Monday, to Monday, November 2nd, the day before Election Day, and it's from 7 a.m. in the morning to 8 p.m. at night. Election Day, which is on Tuesday, November 3rd, it's also from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Unlike previous years, you will not go to your traditional polling place. If you used to vote at a firehouse in Prince Frederick, that is not where you'll go this year. You will vote at one of the vote centers assigned by your county and approved by the State Board of Elections. You can choose any one of them. So you do not have to pick one that's near your house. If you work in one end of the county and live in another end of the county, you could technically vote in any one of the vote centers and your vote will count. Next slide, please. So this next slide depicts the early voting places, the vote centers, and the secure drop boxes. You'll notice that in the secure drop box locations that some of the counties have staged installations. So some of them are going to be ready as early as next week, whereas others will not be available until mid to the end of October. So just be aware that if you did want to put your ballot in a drop box, just make sure that the location that you want it to go in actually has a location on the date you want to drop it off. Just try not to hold on to your mail-in ballot. Make sure it gets there early. The state of Maryland has allowed the voting centers to begin counting the votes as early as October 1st, but the results will be embargoed, meaning they will be held, they will not be publicized until after the polls have closed on Election Day, November 3rd. Next slide, please. And Ms. White.
There may be multiple candidates for a number of races. Make sure you vote for the right number of candidates on the ballot. So read the directions very carefully. On the federal level, you have the president and vice president, the House of Representatives, and for us, we need to pay attention to District 5. No state races. local, judge of the circuit court, judge of the Court of Appeals, judge for the Court of Special Appeals at large, and Board of Education for Calvert and St. Mary's only. As stated previously, local elections really matter. You obviously care about education since you decided to continue your education in college. Make sure you elect officials that will address any concern you may have about the educational system in your county. This will impact your younger siblings, your cousins, your neighbors. Next slide, Janet.
There are also two referendums on the ballot this year. The first one is the legislative authority over state budget amendment. It simply means that the amendment would authorize the General Assembly to enact a balanced budget bill for fiscal 2024, so 2 years down the road, and each fiscal year thereafter to increase it, decrease it, or add items as long as the General Assembly doesn't exceed the total proposed budget that was submitted by the governor. And you can choose to agree or disagree with that referendum. The second one is whether you approve the expansion of commercial gaming in the state of Maryland, which would authorize sports and events betting for the primary purpose of raising revenue for education. And again, that's either you vote for it or you vote against it. Next slide, please. So let's talk about candidates. Who can I support? It's really a difficult process sometimes to figure out who you're going to vote for. Sometimes their positions on issues are similar. So how do you decide, and what's your rationale for picking a candidate to become an elected official? It's your responsibility to become an educated voter. You want to make sure that you know what your positions are, how you feel about the issues, and align them with what the candidates stand for. So where can you find candidates' views on issues? The League of Women Voters has a national website called vote411.org. It will be available probably at the end of this week for the general election. You can view who is going to be on your ballot by simply putting in your address, and it'll tell you all of the candidates who are going to be on your ballot when you vote this year. The candidates were given questions to answer and given an opportunity to put those answers into this online tool. Most of them do participate and they answer the questions. They are not ever edited in any way. So what you read on the vote411.org website is exactly what they've written as the answer to the question. Another place that you can find information is in your newspapers. A lot of the time, the local newspaper carry interviews or a specific issue that deals with what the candidates stand for on particular topics. So that's another. There are debates that are televised, or they are on local YouTube channels, or Zoom, Facebook Live, all kinds of different debates. And virtual candidate forums are also held the same way. The League of Women Voters of Calvert County is going to be hosting 2 of those virtual candidate forums, and they're advertised on our website. The ones that'll be held in St. Mary's will be advertised in a similar way. The one thing that we advise is not to get your news from social media. It is not vetted. There is a lot of misinformation on social media. There is a lot of disinformation on social media because the social media companies are interested in one thing, making money. They are not interested in making sure that the facts are correct. So if you're serious about learning about your candidates, use a different source of information. You can also sometimes observe candidates in a community setting interacting with people. Unfortunately, this year, that's a little bit hard. So how do you stay informed? Just be careful about the social media, talk to your friends and family, have your spirited conversations, but at the end of the day, it's your opinion that matters. Next slide, please. Ms. White.
Figure out the best way to vote. Mail-in ballots deadline for requesting an application is October the 20th. Early voting or on election day. There has been a lot of attention in the media about mail-in voting being fraudulent. This is not true. Over the last 20 years, one case of fraud per state every 6 or 7 years, a fraud rate of 0.0006%. 5 states conducted mail-in voting exclusively. Military has been using mail-in voting for decades. Mail-in voting has occurred as early as the Civil War. Know your rights. Refer to the League of Women Voters of Calvert County Voter Bill of Rights. Check our website. Check your voting status and use my voting plan to make sure you vote. Important dates to remember. October the 13th, deadline to register to vote or change your voting status. October 20th, deadline for submitting a mail-in ballot application. Must be received at the Board of Elections office that day. October 26th through November the 2nd, early voting from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. November the 3rd, election day, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Remember that traditional polling places will be closed, such as firehouses or elementary schools. You must use one of the voter centers listed on the previous slide. Janet?
Don't let other people influence how you vote. It's perfectly reasonable, as I said before, to have spirited discussions with friends and families. But at the end of the day, it's your choice and it's definitely your future. So make sure when you're casting your ballot, it's your vote. One of the things I regret is voting like my parents did. As I look back, I realized that I would not have voted as they did because we have very, very different views on political and human issues. As a young adult, you owe it to yourself to develop your vision of what you want your future to look like. So from a personal perspective, do you know where I stand on the issues? Am I concerned about college affordability or the huge amount of student loans that exist in our country? Am I in favor of gun violence prevention or a proponent of gun rights? Do I believe that immigrants should be covered by health care or not? Am I happy with the status quo for income and wealth equality or inequality? Do I support Black Lives Matter? If you don't know where I stand on any of those issues, why would you trust me to vote in a way that will positively impact your future? That's why you need to vote. Next slide, please. Ms. White?
The result of just one election can produce long-lasting consequences that can't be reversed for a generation or longer. Lifetime appointments to the Supreme Court or other federal courts are just one example. Look at the chaos over the death of the notorious RBG. Sometimes choosing between two candidates may be difficult, but if you don't vote, you don't have a voice and you can't complain about the outcome. These policies affect your future. Race and ethnicity, social justice, climate change, and environmental issues. Look at the fires in the West and the flooding in the South. College affordability and education. Health insurance coverage. Most of you are able to stay on your parents' insurance today until you're 26 years of age. What happens if this stops suddenly? Income and wealth inequality, immigration, gun violence prevention, reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights. Janet?
Students and young people have the power to change the course of their futures. It's important to vote because your vote does matter, because you matter. We hope, can I have the next slide, please? We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and you've also learned some things. We ask one thing of you as you consider the questions you might like to ask today. Vote in 2020. Go to lwvcalvert.org if you have questions and you want to contact us. We'll be migrating to a new, more robust and informative environment within the next week. So please check us out at that website address. And if for the next few days you find that it's dark, it's simply because the migration is in process. But you can also email us at lwvcc.voterservices@gmail.com. Since you'll be getting a copy of the presentation and the slide with the early vote centers and the secure Dropbox locations, you'll have this information readily available to you. So if you have any questions, we'd like to take those questions now. If you need to register to vote, we encourage you to use one of the online applications that we've discussed earlier. So we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, our first question is, I'm worried about being harassed at the polls. I saw that happen in Northern Virginia on the first day of voting. What should I do if this happens to me?
What I would say is that you have every right to vote and nobody should be intimidating you. If you find that happening, there are people called poll workers or election judges that are there to support you every step of the way. You can also call the ACLU right from your spot in line if you've got your cell phone on you, and you can report that to them and they will immediately address it. There is no reason for you to feel that you cannot vote because someone doesn't want you to vote. That's actually even more reason to vote. But always use the ACLU as a backup because they will always support voting rights.
Thank you, Janet. All right, our next question comes from Christine. Do I need an official ID to vote in Maryland?
Glad you want to take that, Ms. White?
Yes, in most cases, you will not need to have a voter ID. The only time you might need one if this is your first time voting or if you have changed residence.
Thank you, Ms. White. Our next question comes from Caitlin. What if the outcome is not clear a day, a week, or a month after the election? What happens next?
So every state runs their own voting systems and have their own rules, but there will eventually be an outcome. So it isn't until much later in the process that the Electoral College actually casts its votes, let's say for president. So there is plenty of time to work out the kinks on it. Unfortunately, back in 2000, when there was that disagreement, shall I call it, in Florida, where there was no clear winner and therefore there was no clear Electoral College winner, there was a lot of stuff that went back and forth, and eventually it went to the Supreme Court, and they took the case and they said that Florida had the right to determine the way it ran its elections. And so they stopped the recount and they called the election. But that was all the way in January. So a lot of things can happen. But the one thing I would ask you this year is be patient, because there is going to be so much mail-in voting and some states don't start counting those votes until Election Day, the results of the election may not be the next day or a week or a month away. It will take time, but in the end, we hope that the true winner prevails.
Thank you, Ms. Belize. So our next question is from Laura. She said, can we volunteer at our polling stations the day of voting to support voting?
I would say to check with your local Board of Elections and see if they will allow you to do so.
Generally speaking, in order to assist in the polling place itself, you need to be an election judge, and that requires training. You also get paid for the day to do that, though. So if there are no more training sessions available, but they still have a need for election judges, they will often just mail you a manual, which you can become familiar with. And then you can show up that day, and there are probably 15 other people who know exactly what to do, who can help you learn more about it. But it's a long day, but you do get paid, and it's an incredibly worthwhile and rewarding experience. I highly recommend it.
Thank you. Here's a question from Erica. Should I mail in my ballot and then go to the polls on Election Day too? I'm nervous that my ballot won't get to the Board of Elections in time.
So as we said earlier, you can track your mail-in ballot online. So all you have to do is you look up your registration information, and there is a section that tells you whether your ballot has been received. Once it's counted, it will also say it's counted. If for any reason the timing just does not seem to be right, let's say you've dropped your ballot off the day before Election Day, and the Board of Elections are just inundated with those types of ballots and just haven't gotten to yours yet, and you're nervous because you really want your vote to count. You may go to a vote center on Election Day. They will have a record that you requested a mail-in ballot. If you insist that you want to vote, you will be given a provisional ballot, which will not count unless your mail-in ballot never shows up at the Board of Elections. But voting twice is a felony, okay? So you need to be careful and make sure that you're voting a provisional ballot if you've already submitted a mail-in ballot.
Thank you. Our next question is from Anna. Will we be receiving the regular sample ballot this year that lists the people and questions on the real ballot?
Yes.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will.
The Board of Elections also informed us that because there's so many changes with the vote of the polling places, that information will also be on that, that sample ballot that you'll receive.
Thank you. From Shawnee, can we request a new ballot if we mess up the current ballot?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you can. But make sure you do it in adequate amount of time in order to receive a new one, a new ballot.
Right.
Or unless you're at the polls, you can get a new one on the spot.
Exactly. If you're at the polling place and you make a mistake, what they do is they call it spoiling the ballot. An election judge will take your ballot, they will mark it as spoiled, and they will give you a replacement ballot. If for any reason you make another mistake, you are entitled to 2 replacement ballots. After that, then you're kind of out of luck, but at least you have a second try.
Thank you. All right, and Shawnee has another question. When is the earliest we can receive our ballot so that we can make sure to mail it early?
The mailing of the ballots is under the control of the Board of Elections, and they do intend to mail them beginning this week, most likely towards the end of the week. If you have not received your ballot within 10 days of that date, let's just say by October 3rd, if you have not received your ballot, you should call the Board of Elections and tell them you have not received your ballot. It should be noted, though, that they will be mailing ballots out over a period of time between September 24th and October 20th, and then a few days after, because people are submitting their applications at different times. So as of, let's say, I think it was September 9th, the Calvert Board of Elections had already received 10,000 applications for mail-in ballots. So they will be mailing at least 10,000 ballots out this week, and then they'll group them, and then they'll mail the next set and the next set. So if you mailed your ballot, your application in very early, you should expect to get it soon. The longer you wait, the later you'll get your ballot. Okay, but if you become concerned, you can call the Board of Elections.
Thank you. Carolyn has a comment and also a question. The League's vote411.org is really helpful for comparing candidates' positions and philosophies in their own words. Can you suggest any other similar websites?
I do not know of another website off the top of my head that captures local elections. And of course, each individual would be interested in what was on their particular ballot. I don't know of any, but I will definitely look that up, see if I can find anything that would be helpful. And we can send that information back to the college to post or get back to you on that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So we don't have any more questions currently, but we will give it just a couple more minutes.
Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. So thank you very much to Janet Belize and Gladys White from the League of Women Voters of Calvert County for taking the time today to be with us. Janet and Gladys, if students have any additional questions or would like more information, how can they get in touch with you?
Either through our website or our email address.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you for joining us for today's Informed, Engaged, Empowered equals Ready, Set, Vote session. Please visit the Student Life's event page to register for other events in this series and for a full list of student life activities for the fall semester. Stay healthy and stay well, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.